The intention this evening is to conclude chapter 17, please God, but more importantly, that concludes an entire section of Tanya, which we've been speaking about already for a while, that this is going to round off a whole section of Tanya, so that's a big achievement. And hopefully at the end of this we can do a test, and everybody will remember what the previous 17 chapters were all about.
I only started in the middle.
Okay.
From 16 on.
Okay, so chapter 17, let's remind ourselves what it is that we're speaking about. 2 weeks ago, we learned that there are some people who are so far gone that they even lose the opportunity to make healthy choices. So then we said, whoa, hang on a second. If there's somebody who's, as we said, Heim Birshus Libam, they are under the control, under the sway of their impulsive heart, and they don't really have the opportunity to make decisions, can they ever come back from that? Or do we believe that there's a possibility of somebody being a write-off? Is there such a thing as a Jewish write-off? Maybe if you ask some Jewish mothers, they'll tell you, that person's son, that's a write-off. Not mine. My son is fine, but that person's son, that's a write-off. But then last week we learned that there is always the possibility of Teshuvah, and there's always a way home, and there is always a path. You just have to know how to find that path, and you have to know how to find your way home. It reminds me a little bit of a story that, it's a whole long story. I'm not going to get into all the details now, but essentially it was the story of the guy who gets lost in the forest. He's riding his horse, he gets lost in the forest. All he needs is to work out which direction to turn, that's all. Because the same force, the same speed that got him deep into the forest is the same speed that's going to get him out. He just has to orient himself. He has to get the right direction. And that's essentially what we're saying over here, is that at the end of the day, you could have somebody who is in such bad shape that they literally have lost their options for being able to make healthy choices, but they can still make a choice to come back. The fact that a person is under the sway and control of their heart, of their impulse, of their self-interest, is never a forever state. And that's a really, really important concept. Later on, the Alter Rebbe will come back to this in a lot more detail. In fact, everything we're going to learn for the rest of this chapter will be discussed in a lot more detail later on in Tanya. So essentially, we're just introducing the concept at this point. What we're going to be talking about this evening is, obviously, you're not going to be surprised, because we're talking about how a person can find their way back. So what we're going to talk about this evening is called Teshuvah. Except the very first thing that we're going to discover as we start our journey this evening is that not all Teshuvah is created equally. So people use the term very broadly, very generically, do Teshuvah, right? But not everybody knows that there are different kinds of Teshuvah that have different results. And so from here to the end of the chapter, we're going to talk about the very basic Teshuvah that is necessary for somebody who is so far gone to get back on the path. What is that Teshuvah called? So we're going to dive right into it, because we actually have some deep stuff to deal with this evening. Not to suggest that the rest of the time we're not dealing with deep stuff, but, okay, let's just get on the screen on page 74, if you are looking in the actual book. And more specifically, do you see there's a set of brackets about 2/3 of the way down the page? Do you see that? So we're starting straight after those brackets, and the same will apply if you're looking on the screen. It's the same concept. So you're going to look straight after the brackets. Vehi. Do you see that? No. Vehi. Vehi. What we have just described over here is, what did we describe? Do you remember last week there was one key that we spoke about in terms of how to do Teshuvah? What was that key? Anybody remember?
Talk to yourself. Have a stern talk with yourself.
Have a stern talk with yourself is a good thing. But we said something very specific last week.
Acknowledge.
No, we said something very specific last week. What did we say? You have to have a broken heart. That's what we spoke about last week. That a person has to have a broken heart. And we described that a broken heart does not mean that you feel terrible about yourself and you go into some dark place of recriminations and self-guilting and all that. No, that's not what it means. We mean your heart is the part of you that acts without thinking. Your heart is the part of you that is impulsive. Your heart is the part of you that is self-interested. Your heart is the part of you that indulges and creates resentment. And you've got to break the heart. You've got to break that loop. You've got to break that behavior continuum where we just keep doing the same things again and again and again. That's what it means to break the heart. Breaking the heart. Vehi bechinas teshuvah tata'a. That is called the lower teshuvah. Now, needless to say, when you encounter the expression lower teshuvah, it obviously implies that there's also a higher teshuvah. Obviously, it's a relative term. So the minute we're introduced to the idea of lower teshuvah, we should immediately be curious and say, okay, you're obviously going to tell me what the lower teshuvah is. What is higher teshuvah? What does that look like? So what is teshuvah tata'a? What is the lower teshuvah? Laha'alois hey tata'a. The objective of teshuvah, the lower teshuvah, is to restore the lower hey. At this point, you probably have no idea what he's talking about, because these are very, firstly, unfamiliar concepts and also very profound concepts. So we have to obviously put this all together and explain what's going on. But we're not there yet. Let's go a little further. Lahakimo min filasa. The objective of the lower teshuvah is to lift it. What's it?
Soul.
The hay. We just said the hay, right? So it's to lift up the hay. Shenoflo el hachitzonim. That fell into the chitzonim. Chitzonim means the extraneous powers.
Is the hay meant here as a letter or
as a letter? As a letter. The letter hey. Okay? So what is the lower teshuvah, the entry level teshuvah? It's to elevate the lower hay. We have not yet identified what a lower hay is, where the lower hay comes from, where it comes from, what it represents. We haven't discussed that. We're not there yet.
The little yud and the
No.
hay is the chitzoni?
No. It's a hay. A hay is a hay. A hay is as it appears, it's a hay. And this hay, what happened to it? It fell down into a foreign environment. Mina filasa, right? It fell down. She'nofla el hachitzonim. It fell down into the extraneous foreign environment. Okay, what are we talking about? So we know that the underpinning of the whole of creation is, what's the secret code of the, no, I don't want to say creation, of all of existence? What is the secret code of the whole of existence?
Words?
Yeah, Hashem, words, Torah, these things are all, I suppose, correct. But we have to be a little bit more specific. What is the underpinning, the substructure of the whole of existence? Okay? Is what? Thank you. Is Hashem's name, but more specifically, there are many names of Hashem, many names. So the name of Hashem that is the underpinning of all existence is the name that is spelled Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. How do you know that that's the underpinning of the whole of existence?
I think isn't that the spiritual kind of building blocks?
How do you know?
Oh, yeah.
So if you take that word, you've got inside that word the letters that spell Havaya, which means bringing into existence.
Oh, wow.
So this is the name of Hashem that represents the code that brings everything into existence. Why do we say everything into existence rather than creation? Because there are certain things that exist at such a lofty level, they're beyond creation. And even they come into existence because of Yud, Hey, and Vav, Hey. Right? That's how they come into existence. Now, you could probably picture in your mind what those, I don't want to say 4 letters because it's 3 letters. One of the letters is repeated. You could probably imagine what they look like, but let's just go through just in case somebody can't visualize what the letters are. So what does a Yud look like? And before you answer that question, what does a Yud look like in a Torah scroll? Because that's the, so to speak, the ideal font of the Hebrew alphabet. So what do you say? It's a point. In the Torah scroll, is it a point?
I don't know.
No?
Is it the hook? No, the hook.
Can't ask a
It's
woman
a-
that question.
Of course you can.
I've
You're
never looked in an art.
okay. That's a different story.
Honestly.
You can ask the
Vav.
question. It's what? A
Truncated
truncated vav. Okay. So somebody said over here a hook. It looks like a hook. What does a yud look like? So in the Torah, a yud is effectively almost like a little square that has a piece that's been pulled down on the right hand side in a curve that gives it the shape of the yud. The yud is like that's what's like a hook. Now in the Torah scroll also, every few there's certain letters that have little crowns that go on top. But a yud, in addition to the crown, has a tiny, tiny little spike at the base of the left-hand side of its base. So again, if you imagine it's like a square, it's got a tiny little piece that sticks out of it. It's called the kotzoi shel yud. It's called like the little hook or the little whatever you want to call it, the point of the yud. Okay, so the yud is very small. Whichever way you look at it, the yud is a very small letter. What does a hey look like?
A
Hey,
resh and a yud.
exactly, like a resh and a yud.
Yeah.
In other words, it looks like you took the yud and you stretched it out. You stretched it out horizontally, and then you pulled it down vertically, and that gives you the main version of the letter hey. And then you put another little, almost upside down yud underneath it. Then you have the letter vav. What does a vav look like? The exact opposite of what you said, right? It's a long yud.
A long yud.
Right?
Long yud.
That's what it's a long yud. You took your yud and you dragged it down. Okay, so those are the three letters we have: a yud, and a hey, and a vav, and then we have another hey. That's the secret of all existence. This is the code. This is the imagery that represents the whole of existence: a yud, a hey, a vav, and a hey. So let's understand what it means in the simplest terms, and then we'll start to unpack it, and apply it to what we're learning over here in this chapter. In the simplest terms, the experience of how a concept develops is it goes through these four phases. The first phase is the concept is born. That's like a yud. The yud basically meaning that it's like the seed. That's where the concept is born. If at that time nobody gives any attention to the concept, it will die. So what that means is if you take a seed and you don't put it in the ground and you don't water it, the seed will eventually be nothing. If you get a brand new idea in your head and then you don't develop that idea, you don't give it attention,
It's lost.
you'll lose that idea and you'll never be able to get it back. And that's that frustration of, I had something on the tip of my tongue, right? I had something on my mind. I don't know where it went. So the yud represents the germination of a new process or the germination of a new concept. The hey takes that yud and expands it. That represents taking an idea or taking a concept and developing it. So you're doing your research, or you're having a conversation about it, or you're fertilizing the seed, allowing it to grow. Now, by the way, a hey is really a 3D letter. So it's a yud that has expanded horizontally. It's a yud that has expanded vertically. The other piece of the hey is not a short piece. That's the piece that goes 3D. You just can't see it on the page. That's the part that goes deep. So essentially what you're doing is when you're taking the yud and you're turning it into a hey, you're giving it a body, you're giving it substance, you're allowing it to develop in all of the ways possible. Then, after you've done that, you need another vav. That only goes in one direction, and that direction is down. Because what happens is all of that processing, the germination of a new idea, the development of that idea, is really all your own experience. But now you've got to bring it down to a level that other people could relate to. So that's what the letter vav represents. And then the final hey is the packaging and delivery, that you can actually put it out into the world.
Sure.
Okay? So if you think about it, any time that a person goes through any creative process, they're going through those 4 steps. I had the idea, I developed the idea, I translated the idea into something that I could actually share with other people, then we could package, market, and put it out there in the world. So in Hashem's terms, that's exactly what happens. It's exactly Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. The reason that this name of Hashem is the name that represents the code of all of existence is because that's exactly how existence happens. First, there's this idea, let there be existence.
Let there be a world.
Not a world. Existence. Because remember, existence is things that are beyond creation as well. Let there be existence. Let there be something that, so to speak, appears different to Hashem or independent of Hashem, depending on where it is. So first there's an idea. We call that Chokhmah. So the Yud of Hashem's name represents Hashem's Chokhmah, which is infinite wisdom, where you can capture all of existence in one point. It's like the DNA of everything. Then you have the process of Hashem determining, which for us would be a lengthy process, and for Hashem is an automatic process, determining how it's all going to work. What's the plan? What's this existence going to look like? What's going to populate this existence? How will we differentiate one layer of existence from the next, one type of existence from another? That's the Hey. That's the whole depth of essentially mapping out the reality of existence. But that is also to speak in Hashem's world. Then he's got to bring it down into the finite reality because Hashem is infinite. That's represented by the letter Vav. That's the drawing down of things into a reality. By the way, every letter in the Hebrew alphabet has a gematria value. What's the gematria value of the letter Vav? 6. How many days of creation are there? 6. The seventh day is a day of rest, right? 6 days of creation. That is the process of bringing this abstract, theoretical concept of existence into all the various realities of existence. And then you have the final Hey. The final Hey is how it's actually delivered. How does Hashem deliver anything into existence? You said it before, he speaks.
Creation.
He speaks. He speaks.
So is this
So-
the outer external Hey is the Hey at the end?
Oh, good. So here's the thing. So if you had to name the particular dynamic of godly energy associated with or represented by each letter of Hashem's name, the Yud is Hashem's Chokhmah, the Hey is Hashem's Bina, the Vav is Hashem's what we call Midos, 6 different manifestations of energy, and the final Hey is what we call Malchus. Malchus is Hashem actually creating. In other words, you can't be, Malchus means royalty, right? You cannot be a king until there are people to serve you. So Malchus represents where Hashem now creates a reality that can serve him. That's the lower Hey. The lower Hey that we're describing over here is Malchus. It's the dimension of godliness that Hashem has shared with us. Everything before that is completely beyond us. But here's the dimension of godliness that Hashem has shared with us. There is one little exception, and that is that Hashem shares his wisdom through the Torah. Okay, so there's access to something far greater than the world. That's not what we're discussing right now. We're discussing by default as humans living on this planet, what dimension of Hashem does he share with us? Malchus, the lowest, the final Hey. So it's almost as if to say what Hashem has done is he has deposited a final Hey with each of us to look after. That's our piece of life. That's the part of the final Hey that was entrusted to us. That is who we are. That is the body we live in. That is the world that we impact. That could be in a business sense, could be in a social sense, could be in an activist sense, whatever it is. Whatever in the world we're touching, that's our piece of the Hey. Handle with care. If Hashem has entrusted a piece of his energy, just to trust you a bank account with some money, make sure that you run your business properly, make sure that you give tzedakah. No, he gave a piece of himself to us called the lower Hey, entrusted that to us. What happens then if a person does something with their world that is contrary to what Hashem wants? And they take that piece of the Hey, they take that lower Hey of Hashem's name in their life, and they dump it in a poison vat. That's basically what happens. And Hashem is effectively saying at that point, but I asked you just to look after this for me. Does it have echoes of the Garden of Eden? It's like, I asked you to look after the garden. I just said one thing you shouldn't do. Just one thing you shouldn't do. Don't eat from that tree. Where do the humans go? Straight to the tree. Hashem says, I gave you everything. I gave you your life. I gave you a soul. I gave you an environment to live in. I gave you food to eat. I gave you an opportunity to work, to realize your potential. I gave you family, whatever it is. And what did you do? You took my hay, my little piece of godliness that I entrusted you with,
Within a day.
and you stuck it,
Within a day.
and you stuck it in who knows where. So therefore, the word Teshuvah, you ready for this? The word Teshuvah is actually made up of two parts. This is something that the Alter Rebbe will discuss in much greater detail in the third book of Tanya. We're still in the first section of the first book of Tanya. And please God, our intention this evening is to conclude the first section of the first book of Tanya. But in the third book of Tanya, which is what he calls Igeres HaTeshuvah, the epistle on Teshuvah, 12 chapters dedicated to understanding what Teshuvah is, he comes back to this idea in a lot more detail. And there he points out that the word Teshuvah breaks up into two pieces. Tashuv, hey. Tashuv, hey. Tashuv means it's an imperative, it's an instruction. Tashuv, you return, hey. Put that hay back where it belongs. That's what Teshuvah is. And isn't it fascinating? This is a little bit of a digression, but I think it's valuable. Isn't it fascinating how easily we can turn Teshuvah into a self-interested process? What I mean by that? So, please, I do not mean to offend anybody who is involved in this shir right now. Any association between what I'm about to say and real characters, living or deceased, is purely coincidental. But there's this there's this phenomenon on Yom Kippur. You don't see it so much in our community. You definitely see it in certain very religious communities. There's this phenomenon on Yom Kippur of who could out Yom Kippur the next person. Now, obviously, you can't fast more than somebody else. Like either you're fasting or you're not fasting. Even there, Jews are very competitive people. It's like, everybody's like deciding who's chalishing more than the next person. If you would know how I feel when I don't fast well. I don't fast well. Like, I'm already from 3 weeks before stopping my coffee because I don't have withdrawal and whatever. It's like a whole thing. I'm not talking about that. But sometimes you don't even have to wait for Yom Kippur. If you're fortunate enough, you can daven in a regular minyan where people do this at an ordinary mincha during the week. It's quiet in the shul. Everybody's davening the Amidah. It's quiet. It's during the week. There's no kids running around. Everybody who's there is focused. Next, in the middle of the Amidah, you hear this clap. Bam! Right? You hear this clap on the chest. And you're a bit startled, and you look around, and again, another one. So that person on Yom Kippur is like really, giving it a go. It's like a whole business. Or the people, who get all like verquetscht, the facial muscles and the whole thing. Very often, when people imagine Teshuvah, rather than thinking about Teshuvah, they think about themselves. It's really, really interesting. What do you mean? They think about themselves. Basically, what happens is when people encounter the concept of Teshuvah, they start to think, I'm so bad. I keep doing this. I need to fix up my life. Now, there's nothing wrong with that because that's going to motivate a person to do Teshuvah, but that's not the definition of Teshuvah. The idea that Teshuvah is Tashuv Hey, which originates, by the way, in the Zohar, means that the whole orientation of Teshuvah is focused on what does Hashem need from me. Not what do I need. I don't need. Teshuvah is not because I feel bad and I'm embarrassed and I've got to reconcile with Hashem, because if I don't reconcile with Hashem, who knows what bad things are going to happen, especially when people sit in shul on Yom Kippur. And then the choir, if you're fortunate enough to have a choir. So then the choir starts singing about how everybody's going to die. You ever noticed that? Right? Yeah, exactly. Have you ever noticed that? Like there they are. I always joke about this, that certain pieces whoever composed them didn't pay attention to the words. So sometimes you get in Unasane Toikef, which is all about setting the scene of how the great day of judgment is in heaven. So it says, Mi yichyeh umi yamus, who will live and who will die. And sometimes it gets a little bit confusing, with the choir. So they go, the chazan goes, Mi yichyeh, and they go, Yichyeh, who will live. And then he goes, Umi yamus, and who will die. And the choir goes, Yamus, will die, So here's a whole different kind of teshuvah. This is a totally different orientation. Teshuvah is not about me. Teshuvah is not that I am bad. Teshuvah is not that I fell off the wagon. Teshuvah is there's a hay I'm supposed to be looking after that right now is languishing in the mud.
Is that elevating Hashem? Would that be a right way?
No, you can't say elevate. We don't have the capacity to elevate Hashem, but you can say you're elevating the divine energy that was shared with you. That you could say. So this is a totally different orientation. It's not useful for me to walk around moping about how bad I am. What's that got to do with teshuvah? I'll give you an example, right? Imagine somebody was walking with their baby in the pram, and they forgot to put on the seatbelt, and they hit a bump on the side of the road, and the baby goes flying out of the pram and lands slap bang in a flower bed. Baruch Hashem, right? And the person stands there going, Yoshamnu Boganu. I'm so bad. I'm a terrible father. I'm a terrible mother. I can't believe what I did. The kid is still lying in the mud.
Depends if you're washed
Right?
or not.
So what's Teshuvah Teshuvah? It's a whole different orientation. The goal of Teshuvah is not to feel like I'm rotten. The goal of Teshuvah is to do something to uplift the hay that I stuffed into the mud. It's a whole different approach to Teshuvah. In other words, it's not even beneficial to feel like I'm a rotten, guilt-ridden, what does that help?
A degree of introspection.
Introspection, absolutely. Yeah. But there's a huge difference between introspection, which is healthy and honest, and what Jews like to do, which is oy vey izmir. I'm so far gone. I can tell you from experience. I shared this with in the share a few weeks ago, right? That what happens as a good Chabadnik, a guy with a pair of tefillin, stops some random person. Excuse me, would you like to put on tefillin? What do they say? I've never tried this with a non-Jewish person before, but I would assume that if I went over to a non-Jewish person and I said, "Excuse me, sir, would you like to put on tefillin?" They would say, "What is that?" And I'd explain, sorry, you're not Jewish," and that would be the end of it. If I went over to a non-Jewish person and I said, "Excuse me, sir, would you like to give some money to charity?" What's he going to say? Yes or no? Jewish person, would you like to put on tefillin? Rov, I'm not a good Jew. Who asked you? Who asked your opinion? The last, and it happens regularly. The last time I put on tefillin. I don't care the last time you put on tefillin. It's got nothing to do with me. That's your business. It's not my business. Well, why does the Jewish head go there? I literally had a situation once in shul. I got up and I spoke about something, and I was actually saying it quite tongue-in-cheek. And there was a person in the community, they were not a member of the community, they happened to be visiting the shul that Shabbos. And they said afterwards, the rabbi attacked me in shul. In front of everybody. In front of everybody. I had no idea that this even happened. I was literally tongue-in-cheek making a joke about, how people they come to shul for the kiddush. That's it.
So he came to
I came to shul the kiddush. So where does the mind go? Immediately, I'm a bad person. The rabbi thinks I'm a bad person. Here's a whole different orientation. Teshuvah. I was entrusted with a treasure from Hashem, the lower hay of His name, which He gave me to look after. He embedded it inside my neshama, and I left it. I left it in the car with the windows closed. So what am I going to do? Cry and berate myself, or get the car open? So again, if you don't have the introspection, you don't realize it's happened. But if the introspection breeds all this moping and morose behavior and woe is to me and I'm so bad, and I so often I hear people say, I'm not a good Jew. Where do you get this from? Who gave you the right to even say that? So here he's saying, no, you've got to realize, Teshuvah Tator, here we're talking about a person who is so far gone that they battle to have any level of self-control. And what do we tell them that they need? Break that heart. Break that impulsivity. Break that sense of everything having to orbit around me at the center of the universe, and get on with the job of lifting up that hay. Doesn't mean to say it's going to be easy. Breaking a heart is not easy, and as we'll see in a moment, it's to break the spirit of the person. Not easy, but there's an orientation. And then he goes further and he says, this idea that that you take the hay and you stick it into an unhealthy place, shehu soid golus hashchina. That is the deeper meaning of something that the sages speak about frequently, where they speak about the divine presence being in golus. Now, unfortunately, Stan will agree with us, I'm sure. There are many people in the Jewish world, particularly in the rabbinate, who for some reason feel that it is useful to use language that nobody else uses, and they think that people are going to understand what they're talking about. It's a big problem. So one of two things happens, but rabbis have one of two problems. Either they think that they saw a word that is the translation of something, and therefore everybody else knows that word, or they saw a word which looks very big, and then if they say that word, everybody else will be impressed. And very often, neither happens. So, for example, you have the rabbi who gives a whole drosha about levirate marriage.
What?
Exactly.
Levirate.
Nobody has ever heard of levirate marriage.
I've
Right?
heard levirate.
You're right.
Like-
Right?
Neighbors get together.
What's
Two
that?
neighbors get together.
No.
Levirate for
Right?
Christians.
It's called a yibum. In Hebrew, we call it yibum. Nobody knows what a levirate marriage is. If you're not going to explain the process of yibum, it doesn't help to use the expression levirate marriage. Same concept. You take the word golus and people translate it as exile.
Exile.
It's not a relatable term. It's not a relatable. What do you mean exile? The divine presence is in exile. Okay, now I get it. So let's try a different take on this. And let's say the divine presence is being held hostage. Now, the minute you say held hostage, you could relate to that, because you understand that held hostage means the person is not in their home environment. They are being held against their will. And as a result, they are very limited in terms of their functionality. There's many, many normal things that they cannot do. So this is the secret of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, being held hostage, which means being trapped in a hostile environment. K'maimer Azal, and this is similar to a saying in the Gemara, which usually we use as a very positive saying, but here we're going to illustrate that there's another option. Galu le'edoim shchina imohem. So what the Gemara is saying is that the Jews are never left to our own devices. Hashem is always with us. So Galu le'edoim, when the Jewish people were exiled, literally exiled, by the Romans, because they were literally kicked out of their homes. So that's literal exile. When they were exiled by the Romans into the Edomite Empire, which at that time was the largest empire in the world, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, went with them. So the Jews should never think, oh, we left Hashem behind in Jerusalem in the ruins of the temple, and he's not with us in our tzoros.
Where would Edom be
Today?
today?
It's a good question. But just say the Roman Empire is the easiest way. So whatever the extent of the Roman Empire was, that was Edom. Okay? So now, that's usually said as a very positive thing, but the Alter Rebbe says there's a downside as well, which is, dahainu, it means, Adam oise maaseh Edom. When a Jewish person, because the word Adam is used in the Torah to refer to the Jewish people, whereas the phrase ha-Adam is used to refer to humanity. So when a Jewish person, oise maaseh Edom, behaves like an Edomite, which basically means when a Jewish person does things that are contrary to the Torah, then that Jewish person, by virtue of that behavior, drags down the spark of godliness that keeps that person's neshama alive, so their lower hay, they drag it into Edom with them. Okay? And what happens then is, המלובשים בו בנפש הבאמיס מהקליפה, שבליבו שבחלל השמאלי, המולכס בו בראשו, ומשלס בעיר קטנה שלו. So then what happens is, remember we're describing over here a very specific person. We're describing a person who is so spiritually off the rails that they are in a state where they don't have any self-control and they're completely controlled by the impulsive side. So what that really means is that the animal soul is now overriding and in control of the spark of godliness inside their neshama. This is a very unhealthy place to be. Can you imagine? Somebody's in a state where the neshama that has so much power, that is literally a spark of Hashem, is being held hostage by a wild animal soul. Why do I say wild animal? Because there's no discipline here. This is a person whose heart just runs the show. So they're living in this completely deranged state of being. Even somebody who's not so spiritually intact, they'll look at this person and say, "Gee, you're completely dysregulated. You have no self-control. You have no direction. You have no ideals." So that's somebody who's taken the hay of Hashem's name that was entrusted with them through their neshama, locked it up in a prison that's being guarded by an animal soul that is out of control.
Sounds like me.
So it could be personal again.
Absolutely. And therefore, therefore the experience that this person has is their neshama is kavusha begoila. There are two states that a person could be in. A person could be in a hostile environment. That's one possibility. It's called galus, when a person's in a hostile environment. And then you could have kvushim bagola, which means not only is the person in a hostile environment, but they are completely shackled in that environment. It means to say that they literally can't move. So it's the difference between the person who was taken hostage and is being held in some villa in Mexico versus the person who's taken hostage and being held in a cage in Gaza.
And shackled.
So that's exactly what we're saying over here. So now, why is he using, this is very harsh, don't you think? It's pretty harsh, this. Saying, here you are, you've got this gift from Hashem, you've got this hay, this dimension of godliness that was shared with you, that lives inside your neshama, and here it's locked away in a hostile environment. It's very hectic. And the reason for that is because sometimes, and this goes, Jeff, to your point about introspection, sometimes a person needs to be shaken out of their reverie. We're talking over here about somebody who is so out of control, somebody's got to shake them. Someone's got to take them and shake them and say, do you even understand what you're doing over here? They need an intervention. This is their intervention, right? The intervention is to say, whoa, your soul is in the mud. Your soul is locked away and being guarded by this incredibly out of control being, your animal soul. And maybe it will get through to them. Maybe that realization, and there's again the introspection, maybe that realization will shake the person up. And they'll say, I can't behave like this.
But can they realize it?
Well, we have
That's
precedent.
a hard one.
Of course it's hard. But we have precedent that people can realize that. We have a number of stories in our history of people who were shaken out of their reverie. Very often they were shaken by people you didn't expect to be inspirational. So I think I told the story of Elazar ben Dordaya, right? Rabbi Elazar ben Dordaya? Pretty sure I told the story.
Oh, he died on the last
He died at the last. No, he did Teshuvah and he died from doing Teshuvah. So naturally it was the last minute, but in reverse, right? It became the last minute because he was doing Teshuvah. Who got through to him? A prostitute. That happened to be the person who got through to him at that time. But at the end of the day, there's like an embedded message over here. I'll borrow quickly from the Rambam. The Rambam has a very powerful statement. And I want to just contextualize, because context is always important. the Rambam was a prolific writer, not only in the amount that he wrote, but also the diversity of genres that he wrote in. So many people are very familiar with the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, which is the first encyclopedia of Jewish law, 14 volumes, brilliant work of consolidating every area of Jewish law in very concise, rational terms that anybody could learn. So that gives you the sense that the Rambam is this legalist. And then you have the Moreh HaNevuchim, you have the Guide to the Perplexed, which is highly philosophical, dealing with some of the thorniest issues of faith. They say, oh, the Rambam is a philosopher. Now, when the Rambam is speaking in the Moreh HaNevuchim, he's speaking in the voice of philosophy. The voice of philosophy, everything is open to conversation. When the Rambam writes the Mishnah Torah, he's speaking in the voice of law. Whatever's written there is absolute. It's not open for negotiation. This is the law. So that's what's fascinating, that in his book of law, the Rambam writes that it is guaranteed that at the end we'll all do Teshuvah. That's what he says. It's guaranteed. Again, this is not a philosophical book. It's not his letters that he wrote to communities who were very downtrodden and suffering and he wanted to lift their spirits. This is in his book of law. That means that this is binding, this is real. It says at the end, we will all do Teshuvah. Something's going to set off that spark in us. Hopefully, it'll be a shiur or a farbrengen or a miracle that happens in our lives. But unfortunately, sometimes it's something far less happy and positive. But it's guaranteed. And what that's going to do is, we can conclude the chapter with this. As soon as a person feels that broken heart, now that we have defined that broken heart does not mean feeling sad and gloomy and having recriminations and being self-judgmental, but rather a broken heart means breaking the impulse, breaking the wildness of behavior. Then what happens is then what happens is that in turn breaks the spirit of impurity that the person has been clouded with because of their choices and their bad behavior. And very often that's what a person feels, is that they're almost like strangled by that spirit of impurity. It's become so much a part of them, they don't know how they could break free. Once somebody breaks that impulsivity, once somebody breaks that behavior that just cares about me, it's almost immediate that there's a cascading effect that breaks all of that suffocating toxic smoke. He doesn't even give us the full quotation. The verse says, Yispardu kol poyale oven, that all of those who create misdeed or misbehavior, they will be scattered. Obviously, you know that any time you get your enemy to scatter, then you're safe. As long as the enemy is consolidated, then you're under threat. So you spardu, everything's going to break, everything's going to disappear. And then he kama minifilasa v'gam nitzava. At that moment, the lower hay, which is really living inside my neshama, gets out of the mud. Kama minifilasa. It stands up from its position of having fallen and collapsed. But not only does it get up, v'gam nitzava, but now it stands firm. Because one of the most important things that we teach in Judaism is that if a person rebounds from a bad place, they always come back stronger. Gam nitzava. Not only do you get off the low level, but you stand now with strength. This is a very encouraging way to conclude the chapter, because we've spoken about somebody over here. We started the chapter obviously speaking about how accessible it is to have love of Hashem, etc. Then we got onto the person who's not that way, seems to be completely mixed up. And then we say right at the end, but if that person manages to crack that shell, if they manage to reverse that trend, they will come back stronger. Kamoishin is bor b'mokim acher, as is explained at length later on in Tanya. Please God to, one day we'll get there to that point.